Here are the top 5 news headlines from each continent. Africa. Ebola outbreak continues to devastate Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo has killed more than 7,000 people since it began in August 2018. The outbreak is still not under control, and there are fears that it could spread to other countries in the region. Political crisis deepens in Ethiopia. The political crisis in Ethiopia has deepened in recent weeks, with the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, launching a military offensive against government forces. The conflict has displaced millions of people and has raised fears of a wider regional war. Climate change impacts continue to devastate Southern Africa. Southern Africa is experiencing the worst drought in decades, with millions of people facing food insecurity and water shortages. The drought is being exacerbated by climate change, which is causing extreme weather events such as cyclones and floods. Nigerian government declares state of emergency in Katsina state. The Nigerian government has declared a state of emergency in Katsina state, in the northwest of the country, following a series of attacks by bandits. The attacks have killed hundreds of people and have displaced thousands more. Botswana's elephant population surges to record high. Botswana's elephant population has surged to a record high of over 130,000, according to a new census. The population has been increasing steadily in recent years, thanks to conservation efforts by the government and NGOs. Asia. China's rise as a global power continues. China is continuing to rise as a global power, and it is now the world's second largest economy. China is playing an increasingly important role in international affairs, and it is expanding its influence in the South China Sea and other regions. India's startup ecosystem thriving. India's startup ecosystem is thriving, with a growing number of companies raising venture capital funding. The Indian government is supportive of the startup sector, and it has introduced a number of initiatives to help startups grow. North Korea remains a threat to regional stability. North Korea continues to pose a threat to regional stability, with its nuclear and missile programs. The country has conducted several missile tests in recent months, and it is believed to be developing nuclear weapons. Bangladesh to export mangoes to China. Bangladesh is set to export mangoes to China for the first time, following the signing of a Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, between the two countries. The export of mangoes is expected to boost Bangladesh's economy and create jobs. Philippines to ban the import of single-use plastic. The Philippines is set to ban the import of single-use plastic products, such as plastic bags, straws, and utensils. The ban is part of the government's efforts to reduce plastic pollution and protect the environment. Europe. Tensions rise between Russia and Ukraine. Tensions between Russia and Ukraine are at their highest level in years, with Russia massing tens of thousands of troops along its border with Ukraine. There are fears that Russia may be planning to invade Ukraine, and the United States and its allies have warned Russia against doing so. European Union facing economic challenges. The European Union is facing a number of economic challenges, including rising inflation, a slowing economy, and a shortage of workers. The EU is also dealing with the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a significant impact on its economy. EU's Schengen Agreement under pressure. The Schengen Agreement, which allows for the free movement of people between most EU member states, is under pressure due to the war in Ukraine. The influx of refugees from Ukraine has strained the resources of EU member states, and there are concerns that the agreement is no longer sustainable. Rise of populism in Europe. Populist parties are on the rise in Europe, and they are challenging the traditional political establishment. Populist parties often appeal to voters who feel that they are being left behind by globalization and that the political system is not working for them. EU's role in the world. The EU is a major player on the world stage, and it is playing an increasingly important role in international affairs. The EU is working to promote peace, democracy, and human rights around the world. The EU is also working to address global challenges such as climate change and poverty. North America. Alec Baldwin indicted in connection with Rust shooting. Actor Alec Baldwin has been indicted by a grand jury in connection with the deadly shooting on the set of the film Rust last October. The indictment charges Baldwin with involuntary manslaughter. Israel and Hamas agree to cease fire in Gaza. Israel and Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire in Gaza, bringing an end to 11 days of intense fighting. The ceasefire came into effect at 2 a.m. local time on Friday morning. United States and Mexico sign migration agreement. The United States and Mexico have signed a new migration agreement, aimed at curbing illegal immigration from Central America. The agreement includes measures to increase border security, provide economic aid to Central American countries, and streamline the asylum process. Canada announces new controversial vaccine mandate. The Canadian government has announced a new vaccine mandate for federal employees and travelers. The mandate will require all federal employees to be fully vaccinated by the end of January, and all travelers to Canada to be fully vaccinated or show proof of a negative COVID-19 test. United States raises alarm over Chinese military activity in South China Sea. The United States has raised concerns about Chinese military activity in the South China Sea. The U.S. has accused China of militarizing the disputed waters and has warned against any attempts to change the status quo. South America. Bolivia's former president Evo Morales arrested. Bolivia's former president Evo Morales has been arrested on charges of terrorism and sedition. Morales is accused of inciting violence during protests that erupted after he was re-elected in 2019. Peru's President Pedro Castillo under fire for handling of economy. Peru's President Pedro Castillo is under fire for his handling of the economy. Inflation is on the rise, and the government has been criticized for its handling of the pandemic. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro faces corruption probe. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro is facing a corruption probe. Bolsonaro is accused of receiving bribes from businessmen in exchange for favorable government contracts. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro faces international isolation. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro is facing increasing international isolation. The United States and many other countries have imposed sanctions on Maduro's government, and several countries have recognized Juan Guaidó as Venezuela's legitimate president. Colombia's peace process in jeopardy. Colombia's peace process with the FARC guerrilla group is in jeopardy. The FARC has threatened to resume hostilities if the government does not make progress on stalled peace agreements. Central America. Nicaragua's President Daniel Ortega cracks down on dissidents. Nicaragua's President Daniel Ortega has cracked down on dissidents ahead of a crucial presidential election. Ortega has imprisoned dozens of opposition leaders and has cracked down on independent media. Honduras faces economic challenges. Honduras is facing a number of economic challenges, including high unemployment, poverty, and crime. The country is also struggling to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Guatemala's President Alejandro Giammattei faces corruption allegations. Guatemala's President Alejandro Giammattei is facing corruption allegations. Giammattei is accused of protecting corrupt officials and of using his position to enrich himself. El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele faces criticism for authoritarian crackdown. El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele is facing criticism for his authoritarian crackdown on dissent. Bukele has arrested dozens of critics and has cracked down on independent media. Costa Rica faces political uncertainty. Costa Rica is facing political uncertainty ahead of a presidential election. The race is expected to be close, and there are concerns about possible unrest if the election is not seen as fair. Oceania. Australia's climate change policy under scrutiny. Australia's government is facing increasing scrutiny over its climate change policy. The government has been criticized for its failure to meet its emissions reduction targets, and for its support of the fossil fuel industry. The United Nations has warned that Australia is not doing enough to address climate change, and has said that the country is at risk of severe climate impacts. Environmental groups are calling on the government to adopt more ambitious climate policies, including a transition to renewable energy and a carbon price. Tonga volcano eruption sends tsunami waves across Pacific. On January 15, 2024, a massive volcanic eruption occurred near the island nation of Tonga. The eruption triggered a tsunami that caused widespread damage in Tonga and neighboring countries. The tsunami waves were recorded as high as 50 feet in some places. They caused flooding and damage to homes, businesses, and infrastructure. There have been no reports of deaths from the tsunami, but there are concerns about the long-term impact on Tonga's economy and infrastructure. New Zealand climate change law passes Parliament. New Zealand has passed a major piece of climate change legislation. The legislation sets a target of net zero emissions by 2050, and includes measures to reduce emissions from the transport, energy, and agriculture sectors. The legislation is a significant step forward for New Zealand's climate change policy. However, there are concerns that it is not ambitious enough, and that it does not go far enough to address the climate crisis. Environmental groups are calling for the government to adopt even more ambitious climate policies, including a ban on new coal-fired power plants and a transition to electric vehicles. Samoa declares climate change emergency. Samoa has declared a climate change emergency. The declaration is a symbolic gesture, but it also signals the government's commitment to taking action on climate change. Samoa is one of the world's most vulnerable countries to climate change. Rising sea levels threaten to inundate low-lying areas, and extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and severe. The government of Samoa is calling on the international community to take action on climate change. Tonga launches climate change adaptation plan. Tonga has launched a new climate change adaptation plan. The plan outlines the country's priorities for adapting to the impacts of climate change, such as sea level rise, extreme weather events, and saltwater intrusion. The plan includes measures to improve infrastructure, manage coastal resources, and protect the country's biodiversity. Tonga is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change in the Pacific. The government is working to build resilience to the impacts of climate change, but it needs international assistance to do so.